During World War II, venal love in the Third Reich was subject to strict controls, and the SS regime not only did not ban brothels, but actively encouraged their attendance. These special purpose buildings housed an entire mechanism of oppression designed to exploit the most vulnerable. From 1942, camp pleasure houses began to appear en masse in the occupied territories. In Dachau, Sachsenhausen, and even Auschwitz, female prisoners were abused and forced to engage in lovemaking. These places were part of a repressive system created by the Nazis where human dignity did not matter. Initially, women were recruited from the Ravensbrück women's concentration camp to work in the camp pleasure houses, but soon they began to be selected from other camps as well. This was especially true for Germans, as Jewish women were not considered for racial reasons. The selection was handled by SS officers who carefully chose specialists, women who had actually done such work or were suspected of doing so before their arrest. Over time, they were joined by those who were accused of desecration of the race, that is, engaging in relationships with Polish, Russian, or Jewish prisoners sent to forced labor. These women voluntarily applied for service because they were offered relative privileges, full meals, regular medical examinations, protection from beatings and abuse, and exemption from hard physical labor. In addition, the SS promised that they would be released from the camp after 6 months of service. In parallel with the establishment of camp pleasure houses, the Nazis enforced a strict policy against street corrupt love. Women who dared to sell their bodies without a decree from the Reich were brutally persecuted. They were caught on the streets, sent to concentration camps, and subjected to forced sterilization, breaking their fates and depriving them of a future. The idea of encouraging diligent prisoners to enjoy the company of women belonged to Heinrich Himmler, but it would be a mistake to think of it as caring for prisoners. Nazi pleasure houses were created for one purpose: to maximize the labor productivity of prisoners by cynically manipulating their basic needs. There was no room for humanity or compassion in these camp pleasure houses. Prisoners were brutally exploited by offering them the terrible choice of going to a brothel instead of better conditions, extra rations, or a cash bonus. This love imposed on the prisoners proved to be an effective method of coercion. Many of them, eager to receive the coveted reward, actually began to work even harder in the gun factories and quarries. Even in such brutal conditions as the Nazi concentration camps, the racist hierarchy remained unshaken. At first, only those prisoners who could boast of pure-blooded German ancestry were allowed access to the camp love houses. Over time, the Nazi regime relaxed, allowing other nationalities to visit these institutions as well. However, Jews remained an exception. They were always denied access to these places. A special position in this hierarchy was occupied by warders, headmen, and other privileged prisoners. For a certain fee, 2 Reichsmarks, they could receive an extraordinary bonus in the form of a visit to a pleasure house. The cost of this pleasure was quite high. For comparison, one could buy 20 cigarettes in the camp canteen for 3 Reichsmarks. The operation of camp pleasure houses in Nazi concentration camps was strictly regulated, and each visit was conducted according to strict rules. Upon arrival, the prisoner was recorded in a special register and given a room number where a girl was already waiting for him. About 15 minutes were allotted for the whole meeting, sometimes a little more. It is noteworthy that the rooms and girls were never repeated, creating an illusion of anonymity and control. When entering a room, a prisoner was obliged to take off his shoes and speak only on business. Any talk beyond what was necessary was not welcome. Diversity in intimate relations was strictly forbidden. Only the missionary position was permitted. The ascetic environment, imbued with an atmosphere of coercion and control, was often not conducive to attraction. As a result, many meetings did not end in intercourse. Some were unable to do so because of poor health, while others preferred to spend the time in intimate conversation, trying to find at least a shadow of moral support. In Buchenwald, for example, the pleasure house was open only in the evening hours from 19 to 22, in the event of an air raid, water or light failure, or during the broadcast of the Führer's speech. The establishment was closed. The prisoners were deprived of privacy even at such times. SS officers were constantly patrolling the corridor, and the doors were equipped with peepholes for surveillance. The Nazis were very concerned about venereal diseases, so they were careful to prevent them in the camp pleasure houses. houses. Women forced into such work were subjected to regular medical examinations, during which blood and swabs were taken to test for syphilis and gonorrhea. In the hospital barracks, prisoners were given special disinfectant ointments to use before and after each act with a man. Bedding was changed several times a week and boiled. Despite all the measures to protect men's health, the SS did not care at all about the protection of women. The question of contraception was left to their discretion. It was assumed that women themselves would find a way to prevent unwanted pregnancies. In practice, however, such cases were extremely rare. Most women who entered the camp pleasure houses had already been forcibly sterilized, and many had become infertile because of the terrible living conditions in the camps. If the system failed and a pregnancy did occur, the woman was immediately sent for an abortion, and another woman took her place. Although the topic of forced love in Nazi concentration camps became known immediately after the fall of the Third Reich, it was resolutely silenced for many years. It was not until the early 1990s that some women had the courage to speak out about their lives in concentration camps. Until then, no one was interested in their stories. Neither the men they served nor the women themselves, who feared that their fates would be misinterpreted as if they had voluntarily agreed to participate in the camp pleasure houses. These women were few, only a few hundred fell victim to this cruel practice. For these women, forced love was a matter of survival, and in this at least, they managed to succeed. But their suffering was never recognized. None of them received compensation. The only known case of an attempt at justice occurred in 1966, when one of the victims applied for compensation. The application was rejected on the grounds that the statute of limitations had expired, ignoring the severity of her suffering. Friends, this is how the video turned out, and what you think about it, write in the comments.